Check out this haul of homegrown tomatoes. I've picked a literal ton. And these are just the ones from our long raised bed tunnel trellis. We also have several overflow tomato beds that I still have to pick. G'day, I'm Mark from Self-Sufficient Me, and in this video I'm going to give you my 5 top tips on how to grow a ton of tomatoes in just one long raised garden bed such as this. Let's get into it. Tomatoes are by far my favourite food crop to grow, simply because I love eating them. I usually eat tomatoes in one form or another every day. I've never got sick of them. Now you're thinking, what the hell is Mark going to do with all these toms? Well, as I go through these top tips, I'll also share some examples on how I use these tomatoes. At the end of the day, it's all about growing tomatoes for food and not about showing off how many I can grow. What the? And just like magic, the tomatoes were gone and my shorts have shrunk. But let's not think too hard about that. Tip number 1, position and variety. Tomatoes are a sun-loving plant. They come from the solanaceous family. Solar meaning sun, so positioning them in a nice sunny spot helps. However, they will still grow okay in part shade, especially in warmer climates. And how I grew these pink Thai eggs under the canopy of a dying passion fruit and gourd tunnel, part shaded out by other tomatoes on the eastern side, is a good demonstration of that. Tomato plants also grow well in containers or pots, but for most varieties I would opt for a larger pot or container, at least 20 litres, to give the root space it needs to sustain a big plant and lots of fruit. As far as spacing between tomato plants goes, I tend to break the rules. How unusual. And instead of the 40 to 50 centimetre recommended spacing, I'll go down to about 30 centimetres. I usually direct sow our tomato seeds out into the main garden bed where they are to grow, and then thin the seedlings out when about 6 inches high, using the surplus to fill gaps and replant elsewhere as overflow tomato beds wherever I can fit them. Whether you grow determinate or indeterminate tomatoes, those that grow like a bush to a limited height or those that grow like a vine, you will still have to support the plants in some way. Otherwise, the weight of the fruit will pull the plant over and this will cause other problems. Staking, cages and trellises are the most common ways to support tomato plants. This long raised bed trellis tunnel is an excellent structure to grow tomatoes on because it's strong, long, spacious, with limited bending and easy maintenance throughout the season. Along with the type and position of tomato plants, variety is something worth considering closely, because apart from the size, shape and colour, tomatoes can taste different, have a different texture, and have different tolerance or immunity to disease and pests. There are over 15,000 different varieties of tomatoes worldwide, and I encourage you to try every one of them, because you just might come across one or more that are perfectly suited to your backyard conditions and also that you love to eat. Every season I try to grow a new variety that I haven't grown before, just for fun, to see how they go and what they taste like. Before we move on to the next tip, a way to use/preserve tomatoes is to dehydrate or sun dry them. Small to medium sized tomatoes work best, and it helps if they are not too seedy or watery. These pink Thai egg tomatoes are perfect for dehydrating and they taste incredible. Tip number 2, training and pruning. Tomatoes are a sprawling plant, and if you let it do its own thing, you'll end up going everywhere except for where you want it. A bit like a dog that hasn't been toilet trained properly. I like to train our indeterminate plants to 2 main leaders or stems, going directly up a structure for about 1 metre and then let the plant bush out. In this case, I trained mostly indeterminate plants on the trellis side for them to grow up, hang over, and for the fruit to then hang down. I used twist ties and twine to hold the tomato stems onto the Rio mesh as they grew up and over. And on the other side, I grew a long row of determinate tomatoes, which I trained and supported by pulling them away from the centre of the bed with twine secured on an angle to the top of the Rio tunnel, wrapping around the main stem of the plants as they grew. This not only gave space between the two rows of tomatoes for airflow and better management, but it also allowed room to plant a crop of beetroot and a few basil plants. Beets are okay with a little bit of shading out, but as the tomatoes die back naturally and are also pruned back, this gives them access to more sun so that they can develop nicely towards the end of season. So essentially you've got the tomatoes going out of season and dying off just in time for the beets to finish their season off and develop well. Speaking of pruning, I personally think that the less you prune tomato plants the better, because if too much foliage is removed, this can lead to fruit damage from sunburn and make it easier for pests and animals to find the fruit. Having said that, I do prune our tomato plants for two main reasons. Firstly, in order to help prevent disease, and secondly, to train and contain the plant to where I want it. I do think pruning off lower laterals and excess leaders can prevent the plant from succumbing to early diseases such as blight. So I generally do most of my pruning early in the tomato plant's life, getting rid of lower laterals that might touch the ground, foliage showing signs of disease, and any sucker growth or extra leaders growing rogue, taking energy away from the main stems. Once most of the fruit is set and starting to ripen, I don't prune as much because, quite frankly, I don't think it matters as much. I might get rid of some diseased leaves, but at this stage tomato plants have done the job and it's natural for them to succumb to disease and slowly die back anyway. You know, eating tomatoes fresh is one of the best ways to use them. A mixed tomato salad with some vinegar, olive oil, seasoning and a few herbs and cheese not only looks spectacular, it also tastes great. Tip number 3, soil. I've found tomatoes grow best in fertile, free draining soil with plenty of organic matter. But that sounds so cliche. Let me explain it this way. When you are preparing a garden bed for tomatoes, start with a good crumbly soil that drains easily. You don't want sandy or the other extreme of sticky clay, but if you have either, a good helping of organic matter mixed in will work a treat. For clay, I would also add some gypsum, as this will not only help break up the stickiness, it will add calcium, and this has the added benefit of strengthening your tomatoes against diseases. The best organic matter you can use is your own homemade compost or well-rotted or old animal manures mixed in to your existing soil. In this bed I added a whole heap of quail manure mulch that I got from our own quail pen. This mostly old mix of quail manure, broken down straw, sugarcane mulch and the odd egg gave the existing soil the boost it needed to improve structure and increase the fertility enough that no other fertilizer or additives were required for the whole growing period. This type of tomato growing medium not only gives the tomato plants all the nutrients they need, it also holds water well and doesn't dry out too quickly, which can cause fruit cracking. And to help limit evaporation, I like to top the soil with a mulch, be it lucerne, sugarcane mulch, leaf matter, wood chip, whatever. As I've said many times before, mulching is an extremely important part of our gardening regime, and without it, we wouldn't have had as much success. A good easy way to preserve tomatoes is to freeze them. Cut off any bad bits, blend them up, and use the pulp in cooking or make sauces later on. We've just scored a spare fridge from the in-laws that we'll now use to store our extra produce. Tip number 4, pests and disease. Part of our strategy of growing a ton is so we can absorb the inevitability of fruit losses due to pests like grubs and other animals such as birds. If you find your crops are getting decimated, then the only real organic way to stop insects, birds and other animals eating your tomatoes is exclusion through netting. And there are many ways to do that. In our area we have a pest called the Queensland fruit fly, and it spoils the tomatoes by laying maggots in the fruit. Luckily, it's usually the larger tomatoes that get targeted, and that's why we tend to grow small to medium varieties. One common pest that you won't see but can be very damaging to tomato plants, and that's nematodes. These microscopic parasitic worms attack the roots of the tomato plants, causing the plant to die a horrible and painful death. Well, maybe not the plant, but painful for us because that means less tomatoes. Thankfully, you can easily combat nematodes by rotating your tomato crops into different beds each season, and this starves the little worms out. And I spoke earlier about how pruning can delay the onset of these leaf diseases. Spraying the plants with an eco-friendly fungicide can also help prevent disease. But I say again, there comes a point whereby no intervention will stop the plants from naturally dying back, because that's the life cycle. If you do find a tomato plant die suddenly for no reason, then remove it ASAP and burn it if possible, because it might have contracted a serious wilt virus, and you don't want this disease infecting other plants. And if tomato diseases are a constant problem in your garden, try some other varieties that are known to have good disease resistance, and you'll have better results. I love lacto-fermented foods such as sauerkraut, and this tomato harvest I decided to try fermenting some for the first time. Apparently tomatoes ferment well, so I'm looking forward to seeing how these ones taste in about 3 weeks. Tip number 5, harvesting. The best tomatoes are the ones harvested when ripened on the vine. This gives the plant, and primarily the fruit, all the time it needs to draw those valuable nutrients and sugars into the tomato so it has maximum taste and nutrition. The beauty of growing tomatoes like this is you can harvest in bulk for preserving, and you can also grow varieties that don't ripen all at once to extend your harvest and have fresh tomatoes for longer over the season. If you still have too many, give them away to family and friends so that they too can taste the joy of homegrown tomatoes. Because once you try homegrown, you'll never appreciate supermarket tomatoes ever again. And those were my top 5 tips on how to grow a ton of tomatoes in one long raised garden bed trellis tunnel such as this. Remember, position and variety, training and pruning, soil, pest and disease, and harvesting. Do all those things right and you'll grow a ton of tomatoes just like I can. If you like this video, make sure you share it around, give it a big red thumbs up, and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye for now.